All right, good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining PGP, Pretty Good Policy for Crypto. Happy holidays to you. It's the last few days of the year before we all start to focus on the holidays, and hopefully you get to spend time with family, get out of DC, and enjoy that time. Hey, it's just great to be here with you. Good to see you and share information, build a stronger crypto policy community, and drive forward with pretty good policy for crypto. I want to thank our sponsors and supporters, including Zcash, Hedera Hashgraph, which, by the way, I have to say that I was at the Blockchain Association Summit, and I picked up some Hedera Hashgraph socks, which are fantastic. I'm wearing them right now, so I'm representing Hedera. Ernst & Young, and we're going to have Paul Brody from Ernst & Young speak to us today. The Digital Securities Initiative, USC VanEck Digital Assets Initiative, which provides this venue, and Electric Coin Company, my employer. They're all proud sponsors of the PGP for Crypto Briefing and Roundtable series. We're also thankful to the support from the DeFi Education Fund and the Blockchain Association, and they always are here to give good policy updates. And today we have Lindsay Fraser from the Blockchain Association doing that for us. These gracious sponsors make PGP possible, and we're deeply grateful for their support. This has been a really big week in DC for crypto. At least I think so. How many people here attended the SEC Crypto Task Force Roundtable on privacy and surveillance technology, or surveillance and privacy technology? Yeah, there's a few. Well, if you didn't miss it, if you did miss it, you really missed out. But the good news is that there's good video online. You can watch it all. I posted about it on X as well. I do want to just take 1 minute and show a quick excerpt of SEC Chair Paul Atkins talking about privacy in crypto. It's just, to me, a monumental shift in the way the SEC is looking at privacy in crypto and the way the government is looking at privacy in crypto. And I think, in my mind, I'm hoping that the next year, 2026 ahead of us, is going to be the year of privacy in crypto. I really think that's going to be the case. And here's why. Let's go ahead with the video.
Important. Public blockchains are more transparent than any legacy financial system ever built. Every movement of value is recorded on a ledger that anyone can inspect. Chain analytics firms are already exceptional at assisting law enforcement with linking on-chain activity to off-chain identities. In other words, pushed in the wrong direction, crypto could become the most powerful financial surveillance architecture ever invented. Indeed, if the instinct of the government is to treat every wallet like a broker, every piece of software as an exchange, every transaction as a reportable event, and every protocol as a convenient surveillance node, then the government will transform this ecosystem into a financial panopticon.
There you go. I could not have said that better myself. And to see the SEC chair say that is just so refreshing, and I think it signals a very positive future ahead for all of us, and a new, I guess, kind of like just turning over a new leaf in crypto, so that we're focused on things that are more necessary for actually using this technology for everyday people. Privacy is certainly one of those things. All right, I'll stop beating you over the head with privacy, and let's get on to our lightning talks. Our first one is kind of unique in that we haven't had an opportunity like this before. Alex Chiswick, who you all probably know, he's been here before, but he's the Chief Commercial Officer at HarrisX, and he is here to pay you. So for Alex, for HarrisX.
Hey, everyone. So, quick thing, we are a market research company. I know that I have to tell people we're legit, as I've learned in the industry. For those of you who don't know us, we've done a lot of work with Consensus, Blockchain Association. The most visible one who knows about the American Eagle Sydney Sweeney fiasco when she was called a Nazi for jeans? I ran their entire response. We told them not to apologize. We told them we crafted their message, et cetera, et cetera. We're actually doing we got a little messed up. Hopefully the QR code works. We're doing a study for a client. It's paid. It's good for you. It's good for the industry. They want to understand how people use crypto wallets and how people do wealth management, estate management. It's 2 focus groups, 6 to 8 people each, 90 minutes, $250. So hopefully, if you know someone who wants to do this or you can do this, it's pretty easy. It's low stakes. We're legit. We're professional. Nothing will be doxed or going out there, but I think it will help the whole space as well as the clients have better products. So again, thank you so much. Would love to get you guys to participate. Thank you.
Yeah, so Alex has to leave, so he had to go first. But so normally we kick off with our policy update, which is what I'm going to do now. And I'm going to ask Lindsay Frazier, who's the relatively new Chief Policy Officer at the Blockchain Association, to come talk to us and just give us an update on what's happening in crypto policy. Thank you, Lindsay.
Hello, everyone. As Paul mentioned, I am new to the role as of about a week and a half ago. I think I got to meet a decent amount of people here at the BA Policy Summit last week. But prior to joining the Blockchain Association, I led U.S. policy at Uniswap Labs. So have been in and around the space for a while, but excited to have a little bit of a broader role now. And so in terms of market structure, I'm sure everyone has been just inundated with news reports over the past couple of weeks with different compromise documents being put out, different meetings happening. So happy to kind of walk through the latest. I think we'll start with, as we know, I guess we'll go back a couple weeks. So we had the Senate Banking Committee release their first draft of market structure on September 5th, but that was a Republican-only draft. And then we saw the Ag Committee a few weeks ago release their updated draft. That was bipartisan, but there were a lot of sections that were in brackets, which indicated that there were disagreement or still things that needed to be figured out. And as you all know, the eventual process will be once those bills pass out of those respective committees, they will have to be weld together and reconciled before going to the Senate floor for a vote. Banking has primarily been taking the lead as they have sections like AML and others that Ag doesn't necessarily have to deal with, and they're taking the lead there. So we've seen them kind of being the first to consider a markup and try to reach, a bipartisan product. And so the latest there is we saw, I believe it was last Tuesday, mid-holiday party for BA, the Republican compromise document that was sent over to the Democratic staff. And then we saw about 2 days later, the Democrats released their counterproposal. And essentially, I think the high level from the Democratic counterproposal that I think are issues that will be worked out over the next couple months. A lot of it revolves around DeFi treatment. The Democratic staff said they are looking at various requirements for front ends in the DeFi space, which is obviously in the current draft in Title 501, we don't have those sorts of requirements, and that would be something that would be concerning for the industry. They also are working on an AML section. We have yet to see any sort of text or detail there, but that's obviously something we want to keep an eye out for, as we're obviously all aligned on not allowing bad actors to use various crypto technology and platforms, but do not want to do so in a way that violates privacy or kind of hamstrings the innovation of the technology. And then obviously there's other outstanding issues such as the ethics question of what will be the compromise on language relating to the White House and administration's involvement in crypto activities. That's something that's a little bit outside of our control as a purely crypto policy perspective, but that is something that's going to be, I think, really important for Democrats to get on board and finding out a solution that is okay with Republicans in the White House as well. So those conversations have been continuing. And then there's also conversations around quorum. As you all know, we have Paul Atkins now at the SEC, who has been great, and now we will have Mike Selig at the CFTC, but we are still waiting to fill different commissioner seats at both agencies. And so there's discussion around something being included in regards to having a quorum of Democratic commissioners on both committees, especially the CFTC, where there's none right now, and we only have one commissioner in place, making sure that is settled before giving them more authority. So that's been another sticking point on the Democratic side. And so as a result of that counter proposal, the Senate Banking Committee created 4 bipartisan working groups. One is about Title I, so token classification. And I think Jill Brand's office has been a great leader on the Democratic side in ironing things out and getting to a compromise. 2 is the DeFi section. I think there's still a lot of work and education to be done there. And if anyone is interested in learning more, Brian and I have been deep in that for a long time. The third one being the ethics concern. And then last, which is what I will focus on and highlight a recent effort we've been working on, but relates to yield and the ability to offer rewards and incentives in the secondary markets and on third-party platforms in relation to stablecoins. So the Genius Act struck a very careful balance between not allowing issuers to offer yield, but allowing it in the secondary markets. And that was an intentional compromise. We had both crypto firms and banks in the room while that discussion was happening. And that was obviously the solution we all saw in the law in the bill that was passed into law. But we've started to see in the past couple months a big push from the banking lobby to add to one, I guess, on the regulatory side through Treasury rulemaking and requests for comment, push back on the interpretation of offering yield in the secondary markets. But then also, they've been lobbying heavily on the Hill, asking that members include an amendment to the market structure bill that would restrict the ability of people to offer any sorts of rewards or incentives on their platforms. And as a BA membership, it's something that a lot of our members are very concerned about. I think there's the immediate question of how does this impact stablecoin adoption, but I think more broadly, how does this impact crypto adoption? If we are not able to compete with, banks, we see this has been a normal market practice of offering different sorts of rewards and incentives to get people to move their money to the bank, use their credit cards, et cetera. People need an incentive to take the time and effort to move to a different system. And so, the banking strategy is if we're able to limit the ability of the crypto industry to do this, then we'll be able to limit their adoption. And so I think this has been framed in the past as something that primarily will affect, centralized exchanges, stable coins, but I think it's a broader issue than that. And for some of our members, it's a red line to supporting market structure. So to that end, we've put together and have worked with several members a letter that pushes back on this. And for a little bit of context on the Hill, not to get too much into the nitty-gritty there, but this is not a Republican-Democrat issue right now on Senate banking. It's on both sides. Republicans on the committee are getting inundated with banking lobby groups, banking trade associations, community banks. And, the crypto industry, rightfully so, has been super focused on protecting DeFi, token classification, other huge questions that are outstanding in the bill. And so I think that Haggerty staff has been leading this effort and has been doing an amazing job. But I think it would be helpful to those who are working really hard to protect Genius as written, that we show strong support for that and show that it's not just a couple companies here and there that care about it, it's the broader industry. And even beyond crypto, it's a fintech problem as well. So we've been engaging with other financial technology trades and companies to get their support as well. We'd ideally love to have sign-ons by the end of the day today. There's a bipartisan meeting at with the Senate Banking Committee members that Summer, BA CEO, and a couple of others will be at today, and she is going to flag that this letter is coming. And so we hope to get it out by the end of this week. And yeah, would love support. We're having trades on it as well as individual companies. So to the extent that people in this room are interested or know of people who would care and like to be a part of this effort, we would really appreciate it. And also, yeah, happy to answer any questions on the yield issue specifically, but also on the broader state of market structure and policy as well.
Thank you, Lindsay. That was outstanding. If you have any questions, make sure you follow up with her at the break or afterwards. Okay, now we are on to our next lightning speaker, which is remote. It's Paul Brody, Ernst & Young. Paul has had such a big role in crypto that I think maybe, to me, he's not appreciated enough for this. He's not. I would love for him to be even more well known as for all the things he's done, and he is very involved in the Ethereum Foundation, or the Ethereum Enterprise Association, I should say, and in other ways. So, Paul, thank you for sponsoring this event too, by the way. It's really appreciated. We don't hear you.
Thanks for having me. It's
there you go. There you go.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a delight to be here today. Privacy is a topic I care very, very deeply about, and many of you may know I and EY really have been working on this tool and technology called Nightfall for the past few years. So what I'm going to do today very quickly is give you a speed run update on where is Nightfall, how are we progressing, and things like that. So I'm going to go ahead and hit the share button, and hopefully I correctly so that you can see my Nightfall update, and somebody will tell me if I got it wrong. No, okay, sounds like it's somewhat visible. So what is Nightfall? So basically, we are building two things here at EY for enabling privacy. The first is called Nightfall. It's in version 4. We're in version 4 now. It is a ZK rollup that basically allows for standardized functions for very high volume, privacy-enabled payments, transfers, and swaps. We can handle up to 400 million transactions a day, roughly 4,000 at its maximum capacity. It's designed to be scalable, and it's fully it's fully EVM compatible. So you can deploy it basically on top of any EVM compatible blockchain. Very importantly, Nightfall is public domain open source code, and it's a privacy protocol. Nightfall has a sister technology called Starlight. And the issue with Nightfall is we wanted to build something that would enable very significant, scalable, simple transactions like payments and transfers and swaps. But we also have this understanding that for businesses especially, privacy means the ability to do complex business transactions under privacy with customized business logic. Every business agreement, and apologies if you heard me say this before, it's money for stuff under the terms of some kind of agreement. So we've got money tokenized, we have stuff tokenized, and it's easy to move them around. But what happens when you have customized business rules? Those business rules, if you run them in the clear, you're exposing the same kind of super sensitive information. Starlight lets you take a standard Solidity smart contract, mark it up, and turn it into a zero-knowledge circuit. And the goal over time is for these two things to work together so that you can basically model and take any kind of business application tool or process and deploy it under privacy. Believe it or not, Paul Bringer made a very generous kind of reference to this. We've been working on this for a while. I joined EY in 2015 and started the blockchain practice. This is our 10th anniversary. And very quickly, we were like, wow, the most important thing we have to do is build privacy because enterprises require it. So here we are. We've been zipping away for 8 years. We showed our prototype back in 2018 at DevCon in Prague. And back then, we needed 2 full blocks of the Ethereum blockchain and $100 in gas to execute a single Nightfall transaction. Since then, we've gone through a bunch of different iterations. We had an optimistic version. Now we have a ZK version, and it's deployed in a testnet now, and it will be in production sometime in 2026. And so that to me is super exciting. We've been incredibly consistent in the iteration and performance improvements over time. Our goal is, as I mentioned before, is kind of this full composability and scalability. We're not there yet. Right now, Nightfall exists in one kind of bun plume now. The second network, which we announced a few months ago, is Celo, and Celo is another Ethereum Layer 2 network, which is really focused on enterprise payments. We also have a test net up and running on Celo as well, so you can go and have a look at that. And I would say we've probably got 1 to 2 more networks that we will be able to announce early next year, which I'm very excited about. So my goal is that by, let's say, early next year, Nightfall will be the most widely deployed privacy technology available in the blockchain ecosystem. Why do I think Nightfall remains really, really important? Like, there's a ton of privacy tools coming out, and one of my key observations is that, you know, there's this joke like men will do anything to fix their problems except for go to therapy. I feel like a lot of blockchain developers will do anything to enable privacy except for actually use full encryption. And this is going to become increasingly important, right? We have a lot of these like mixers and privacy pools and trusted off-chain systems. They kind of seem to work, but I do not believe that they work at scale for enterprise use for a couple of reasons. And the most important is, first of all, you can't use them with non-fungible assets. You can't use them with any kind of customized business logic. But also what we're seeing over and over again is that the best-in-class analytics systems are making it increasingly easy to track your transactions through bridges, through mixers, through privacy pools. And especially if you're a business and you're doing repeat transactions with a business party, right, you're going to make yourself very traceable in these ecosystems, and you're effectively disclosing this data. And I had this aha moment a few months ago. I was at the Technical University of Munich, and the Chainalysis folks were giving a great presentation. They showed stolen money moving through like 2 mixers and a bridge, right? And all of those things were designed to obfuscate the trail. If they can do that with criminal activities, you can absolutely believe they're going to be able to do that with lots of repeat enterprise transactions that people are not going to extreme lengths to do. So I personally think it's going to be really important as we go into the future to basically put your stuff into a privacy environment and keep it there, right? And for that, we need scalability. We need programmability, we need composability, but I think the one that we're not talking about enough is permanence. Every time you move stuff in and out of privacy, you are leaking all kinds of critical metadata. And if you're a business and you care about your very sensitive business information, that's not a good thing. That is it for my presentation. We continue with our tradition of having new proof of Paul NFTs. And I think if you check my Twitter feed, which is P Brody, we also have a Christmas NFT, a Hanukkah NFT, a Happy New Year NFT, and coming soon we will have a Lunar New Year NFT in the new year. So if you want to collect those, we are minting them now on the Base blockchain. And that is it for me.
I have collected mine.
Thank you, Paul. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. I love your NFTs, the proof of Paul. I need to do something like that myself. Maybe I could just borrow yours, or we could do it together. Proof of Paul's. Maybe that's even better.
That would be perfect.
That would be perfect. You know what? Interesting. I was looking at that timeline. I was thinking about the history of Electric Coin Company and Zcash, and you've been grinding for almost 10 years, as we have. And am I wrong in that a lot of the code from Zcash was kind of the beginning of what you were doing?
Yes, we were very inspired. I don't know that it was the code, but we were very inspired by some of the key ideas inside of Zcash, and that was important for us. And then we started thinking about, okay, how are we going to do this with NFTs, with unique business logic? So yeah, I think Zcash is incredibly the 2 organizations that probably had the most influence on us are Zcash and Aztec.
Yeah, I love it. So thank you for that. So on the whole 10-year thing to write software, there's an article that was written by a very well-known software developer back in 2001 named Joel Spolsky. I think that's how you pronounce it. He co-founder of Stack Overflow. He wrote an article that says, good software takes 10 years, get used to it. And I think that's absolutely true. That's kind of what we're experiencing with Zcash. I think that's what Paul is experiencing with Nightfall. And what I will tell you that you should anticipate is that someday you're going to wake up and Nightfall is going to be running almost all of the enterprise systems that you interact with, and it wouldn't surprise me one little bit because he's been doing the grind and he's paid his dues to make this work. So congratulations, Paul.
Thank you. It would surprise me, but in the best possible way, because sometimes I'm a glass half empty. But I hope I have the same hopes you do, and I hope it's as transformational as you do. And I am every bit as thrilled. That video clip that you showed from the SEC presentation just filled my heart with joy to hear the completely different perspective.
Yeah, thank you so much. Well, you take care and keep up the good work. All right, now we're moving on. We have a couple of our regulars. I think, do we have Kyle here? No. So I guess they're going to be both online. We have Tony Douglas and Kyle Blygan, the Decentralization Research Center. Are they on? Can we bring them up? I know they had a meeting, so we may need to come back to them in a minute if they're not online right now.
Yeah, I don't know if you can hear me, but I'm here.
Yeah, give us one second. We're getting you up on the screen. Hold on a second. That's proof of Paul right there. Okay. You're good to go.
Okay, great. So yeah, thank you for honestly just giving us another opportunity to present our work and some of our reflections. Let me share my screen one second. Also, bear with me. I'm sick for what feels like the 10th time in a month because my 2-year-old just started daycare. So if I cough occasionally, that is why. But anyway, yeah, thank you again for the opportunity. So I wanted to provide some reflections on the SEC Roundtable on Monday. And it sounds like you guys were already primed with the video, which is incredible. And I see that there's a sign that says privacy is normal. So, as is no surprise, privacy is a big focus of these discussions, as it should be. So the DRC, for those that are not familiar, we are a nonprofit think tank that focuses on full stack research, education, advocacy, and support of decentralization. And you can think of this word of decentralization in the context of our organization as representing a broad set of values that we believe to be core to the original promise of blockchain, inclusive of censorship resistance, incredible neutrality, and user sovereignty. And on this last point, I think there are a ton of reflections on this idea of user sovereignty from the roundtable. I think Zuko said it best. This isn't necessarily a discussion about privacy or transparency, but of agency. Who controls their data and what should they be allowed to do with it? So, yeah, with that in mind, I think for those that weren't able to watch the whole thing, I would certainly encourage you to just listen to, I guess, the initial 5 minutes of the opening remarks from Paul Atkins, which I think framed the discussion incredibly well. He really focused on what are the stakes here for this discussion. And so I won't read these quotes verbatim, but he touched on this idea that we need to wrestle with a question that's core and profound to American civil liberties, which is whether people can participate in modern finance without surrendering their privacy. He also discussed that there has been a history for the federal government to basically over surveil. And they had this desire for data that expanded into tools that basically posed a risk to these civil liberties. And, I for one, really appreciated the honesty in that statement. And, he also talked about the stakes here are high. The questions before us carry profound and enduring implications. I couldn't agree more. I'll jump into why in some of the subsequent slides, but I'll say also for this industry, the stakes are incredibly high to meet this moment where there is an SEC that is willing to facilitate these types of discussions without really the risk of prosecution for the people that come forth and provide information, and also an administration that's incredibly supportive of this industry. I guess we can't discussions to the work of really creating policy frameworks and legislation that's going to protect this industry and ensure that these civil liberties are not impinged upon over time. So what was actually discussed, I'll go through this pretty quickly, but you can read the sub bullets. I think probably a lot of people in this room would be familiar with blockchain's ability to bring transparency. This, like any other technical innovation, is brings great benefits, but also some risks. So, if the basically if the tool is not also ensuring that people can have privacy in the digital economy, it's going to be a mass surveillance system, which is incredibly concerning, and necessitates us getting this right. There was this discussion that privacy shouldn't equal criminality. So people desiring to use privacy preserving technologies should not be by default assume that they're doing anything wrong or trying to obfuscate bad behavior. People have very legitimate reasons for using these technologies. There is a trade-off that was discussed. So PETs can provide selective disclosure, etc., but also need to be adequately regulated. They also talked about how markets need privacy to function. This idea on at the top right, on a fundamentally American tension, I think is incredibly important, and I really commend Paul for facilitating discussions from all range of people that care about different things in this sub-bullet, from government professionals that are talking about national security to folks that are thinking about market integrity to the people that are building the technology and are trying to increase freedom and civil liberties. I personally know a broad range of people, from investigators in the government to builders in this space to just researchers providing their sort of academic discipline to some of these very hard questions, and they don't talk to each other enough. And the only way that this tension is resolved, in my opinion, is through not only increased discourse, but trying to find a middle ground between the different perspectives. I will go to the next slide. So, very important as well in the roundtable is that there were open questions that policymakers still need to answer. These are unresolved issues. How much data is actually necessary to ensure compliance? What should compliance, or where should compliance attach? So, the argument, in my opinion, shouldn't necessarily be that no one should have regulatory obligations, but it's incredibly important to place those obligations on the right people within this industry, and at the right scope of obligation. There's still a question of what does selective disclosure look like in law, and right now we kind of default to this like complete disclosure regime, which feels antiquated, especially in a digital economy where doing so poses significant risk to users. How do we avoid assuming guilt? To the earlier sort of point I made on privacy doesn't equal criminality. What changes are going to come about in an AI-driven world? So maybe like this proof of Paul thing is a commonplace in terms of people being able to really prove their identity in a digital sphere. And then what standards enable adoption? What technical standards enable adoption at scale? As I alluded to earlier in that quote from Paul Atkins, we need to move beyond discussion to durable policy. So though this roundtable surfaced the right questions, these need to be answered by a broad group of people, both private and public, that are collaborating to work towards like meaningful, practical policy frameworks. We need a sustained process, not isolated events. And the path forward, again, requires collaboration, technical research, and people in the space obviously have various technical designs for justifiable reasons, and there needs to be some broader education on why those decisions are made. There needs to be ongoing education for Congress and regulators. I think Monday was a great step towards that, but it's a lot to digest all at once, and through a couple of presentations, it needs to be distilled down into very digestible content in one-pagers that can be brought to the Hill to facilitate these discussions. I emphasize this public-private collaboration built on trust and credibility because, again, both of these sides have to work together, and there needs to be security funding in order, for example, like the crypto sleuths of the world, like the SEAL team, to be able to continue the great work that they're doing, and for it to make sense for them to really do this work to experiment with the government to find a solution. And lastly, yes, compromised. So I had to make the joke because we're at PGP, but it is likely that we won't get perfect policy, but we should strive for pretty good policy, right? Like not bad policy, and there will be compromises that need to be made. Our approach to the DRC has been going through exactly these steps, going from research to Hill education to a ton of meetings on the Hill where we are providing public comment letters and legislative suggestions when bill drafts come out, and really trying to make sure that there's this tight mapping between a set of values that are core to this industry and making sure those flow into the actual text that shows up in regulation and legislation. And so lastly, I'll just wrap up by saying, we believe a practical way forward is to have this privacy policy coalition, which, we are standing up right now, and would love the support of anyone in this room or anyone that's interested, which, I'll wrap up by just saying thank you. Please reach out if you are interested in this work. I have been going through a lot of reflections as we wrap up the year and posted this blog that's on the bottom left on our website, and I pulled out this quote, which, as a small profit, we consistently punched above our weight, not because of resources, but because of people. Throughout our journey, we have been fortunate to work alongside some of the most thoughtful researchers, builders, lawyers, and policymakers in this space. People motivated not by short-term gain, but by the desire to see these technologies live up to their original promise. And I share this quote to say, a lot of people wrap up with this slide that you can reach out. I truly do mean it. The more the merrier. We really appreciate the contributions from anyone that's really values aligned with our organization. So with that, I will stop my share and just, Paul, thank you again for providing me an opportunity to speak.
Thank you, Tony. You did just a fantastic job of summarizing the meeting earlier this week. And I've already told you, but I just want to say publicly, I'm on board for the Privacy Policy Coalition. I hope many of you will too. I want to support it in any way I possibly can. If you haven't been to some of their events that they do a nice annual event here in DC. I think they do more elsewhere, and they produce just such substance in their reports and in their recommendations. One of my favorite organizations. So Tony, thank you so much for your work. Please keep it up, and look forward to working with you in the new year.
Thank you, Paul.
All right, moving on. We have two more lightning talks. We have Remy Guy, founder of Inco, and then we have Ying Tong, applied independent cryptographer. So, Remy, can we bring Remy up, please?
Hey, Paul. Hey, hi, everyone.
All right, give us 1 sec. We're trying to get your image on screen. It'll be just 1 sec. There we go. You're good. Go ahead.
All right. So hi, everyone. My name is Remy. I'm the founder of Inco. We are a full-stack privacy solution on top of existing blockchains. So today, I'll be presenting this new report that we recently released with our partner Predicates. So what we did is we looked into all the existing privacy protocols that are already released and dived into their compliance, basically, frameworks. And so obviously, everyone here is already in the crypto space and also understands that privacy is quite necessary for adoption. So on one part, you don't want your salary details, your purchase history to be fully public. If you were to bring your business on chain, you probably don't want your revenue, your trade secrets, your sales, inventory management, etc., to also be public. And then lastly, I'll say, there has been a lot of targeting in terms of, kidnappings that happened recently, especially around crypto founders. So obviously, having your bank account complete public is not a great thing. And what we can learn from Tony Cash is there are practical limitations of privacy without risk management. So we've seen $455 million that has gone through Tony Cash by the Lazarus Group, and then 2022 we had the OFAC sanctions, and also 2023 US DOJ currently charging the developers. So risk management is necessary for privacy protocols. In the traditional world, there are a host of safety, risk, and compliance mechanisms. And typically they're centralized. So everything around operations and custody are typically managed in a centralized manner. However, for decentralized protocols, we probably need a different design. And so this is really why, we want to think more through a on-chain perspective, but also off-chain perspective for these enforcement models. So we propose basically this framework to reason through this entire process. And we mostly took three primary considerations. So the first part is really around the types of privacy. The second part is around compliance enforcement, so where this is enforced and how this is enforced. And lastly, it's really around the disclosure rules. So this is a pretty lengthy report, and given this is a lightning talk, I'll try to cover some of these concepts rapidly. So on the first part, the types of privacy. So by default, everything is transparent. The sender, the receiver, the asset, and the amounts. You get some pseudonymity. However, this is not perfect privacy. There are a lot of tools nowadays that can actively basically dox users and wallets. Then you have confidentiality, where you're just really hiding the amount. So you can think of it similar to like a Venmo, where you can see your friends sending money to each other, just not the amount. And then you have anonymity, where you are hiding the sender and the receiver, but perhaps the asset and the amount is public. And then you have total privacy, where everything is completely encrypted. In terms of positioning, there are privacy protocols that exist on existing public blockchains. So Tornado Cash is an example here. Or you could have a separate blockchain that's privacy centric. And oftentimes these projects basically enforce compliance at the bridging level, which is definitely a slightly different design here. And from a compliance enforcement perspective, we can think about a couple things here. So one is, where is the compliance enforced, right? At which layer? Also, at what point in the life cycle? Who is enforcing it, and what techniques are we? Like Circle's USDC contract. At the application level, this is, I would say, mostly on the front end. So, any client side, any wallets. So this is something, for example, that Railgun implements. And then you could also have compliance enforced at the blockchain protocol level, which could happen via governance. And during this entire lifecycle of transactions, you could also think about enforcing compliance, perhaps at the deposit level, at the transfer level, or the withdrawal levels. And we've seen privacy protocols basically, deciding to implement some of these compliance frameworks really at different parts of the lifecycle here. And there are also ways where you can combine some kind of off-chain with on-chain components. So in the case of predicates, the idea is that you have a policy engine, and this policy engine can be powered by a suite of analytics tools. And so basically, predicate will issue you some kind of on-chain attestation for you to then access certain applications. And you also have, some of these more traditional ways of KYC and KYBing off-chain, and then issuing some kind of on-chain attestation, some kind of NFT, where, you can think of it almost like an on-chain passport. The risk here oftentimes is also around data exploits. And one way that, the space has come up with is something called, ZK identity, which is, you don't necessarily have the third party store any prior information, but you're able to still prove certain information about yourself on chain via proofs. And then you have things like inclusion and exclusion based proofs, proof of innocence, or association set providers. The idea with these two approaches, they're fairly similar. It's also utilizing ZK technologies to essentially prove that you are not part of a specific list of bad actors, or you are part of a specific list of good actors. And this is I would say also gaining quite a bit of popularity nowadays. And it's also quite a clever use of technology to basically enforce this on chain. In terms of this is where we can also think about who are the decision makers enforcing these rules. Is it via a DAO, a governance, or is it based on a third party provider, or is there like an admin behind the scene that basically can also decide on these rules and update these rules, or maybe it is the asset issuer itself. The last part that I'll cover quickly here is really around disclosure rules. Essentially, who gets to see the private data? So by default, user obviously should be able to see their own balances. But can you voluntarily disclose, let's say, your transaction histories in a way that is actually voluntary, right? So that could be one design. Another design could be also having some kind of a view key or committee where this is a little bit more of an involuntary and third-party disclosure that the users are comfortable with. And the idea is that maybe upon an investigation, there are ways where there could be via governance or other means to disclose specific transactions. And then lastly, there also could be protocol level disclosures where, via governance, we can collectively agree to, decrypt something altogether. And in terms of viewing controls, we can also think of them as either predefined. So all the viewing rules are essentially locked in from the get-go, or perhaps programmable where, based on certain conditions that happens on chain, governance upgrades, we can change some of these viewing controls as time goes. And so we apply this framework to essentially all of these popular existing protocols. And you can check out the details in the report here. And I want to say thank you for having me here. And we are definitely excited to dive deeper into this if you're interested to chat more about privacy or compliance. And you can follow us here on Twitter. And then here's my Telegram.
Thank you very much, Remy.
A little bit rushed. It is a
that's a lot to cover.
Report.
That's a ton to cover. I actually downloaded the report as soon as it was available. I reviewed it. I found it super helpful because it really kind of takes apart all the different aspects of how you can evaluate these products that provide privacy and gives you kind of a good standard system to say how they fit across all these different criteria. And I think it's a really important contribution. Remy worked with one of our friends of PGP, Nikhil Raghavera of Predicate, to do that, I believe. And they're just two of some of the smartest people in the industry. So thank you for your work, and we appreciate you being here to explain it to us. I encourage everyone to take a look at that report. Okay, moving on.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. Finally, Yingtong, applied independent cryptographer. Yingtong is, she's brilliant, and she is doing some amazing work, I believe, with the Ethereum Foundation. So if we can bring her up. Hi, Yingtong. You're on. Go ahead.
Hello. Thank you for having me. So I'm going to share some recent work by the Ethereum Foundation on OpenAC. This is a framework for anonymous credentials and digital ID. Much of this work is motivated by the age verification requirements that are becoming widespread across the US as well as the EU. And very often, these age verification requirements are fulfilled using identity credentials that are not privacy preserving. So, for example, the SD-JET is a very commonly used credential format. It is more or less equivalent to the MDL mobile driver's license. And these credential formats enable a very weak property called selective disclosure, but they stop short of enabling unlinkability. And what this means is that even if we do not disclose the plain text value of our credential, we allow the verifier, the relying party, to identify us across multiple presentations and link multiple presentations to the same person. And for the purposes of gathering metadata about how and when and where a credential is presented, the current credential formats are unsatisfactory. In 2024, a group of cryptographers pointed this out to the EU Commission and suggested to replace these credential formats with a well-known primitive, anonymous credentials. So at a very high level, anonymous credentials allows the issuer to use their current signature and credential format, but at the same time enables the holder to make claims about this credential in an unlinkable way. And we've heard multiple times in this session about zero-knowledge proofs. That's the underlying primitive here that enables us to conceal the plain text of the credential, but at the same time convince some relying party that it satisfies certain predicates on a subset of its attributes. So there's been a line of work they're instantiating anonymous credentials using different zero-knowledge proof primitives. And the work at the Ethereum Foundation is the latest in this line of work. And here I've linked our reference implementation as well as a table summarizing its performance in comparison to previous schemes. So really, depending on the deployment context and depending on the restrictions of the user device, we may be interested in different metrics. So what we've focused on here is minimizing the proving latency such that at presentation time, the holder can experience a seamless UX. So right now, most of the work has been moved to pre-computation and setup, leaving the prover with only 102 milliseconds of work at presentation time. So I won't get into the details of how these schemes differ on the cryptographic primitives, but suffice to say that there's different points in the trade-off space that you may be interested depending on your requirements. And another metric of interest would be the requirements on storage and memory. So if your device is mainly memory constrained or storage constrained, but not compute constrained, then you may want a smaller proof setup with a longer proving time. So I think what's important for most of this work is dialogue with regulators, policymakers, and standards bodies. So here you can see a table mapping requirements in the EU Commission's high-level requirements for EU digital identity. Mapping these requirements to the features and affordances in our OpenAC framework. And that's one gap we found in many academic papers is it's missing this translation from the cryptographic affordances to regulatory requirements. So I've linked here our paper, and I hope that this is in the annex, and I hope it will be helpful for those coming from policy side. The last sort of effort that is crucial here is standards. So making sure that these schemes fulfill the security requirements and privacy requirements needed to make them work in these schemes. So we're working with the Linux Foundation Decentralized Trust Labs to set up a standardization lab for generic ZK snarks. And I've put the link here. We're having an online meetup on January 14th. So please reach out if you're interested in learning more about standards for ZK snarks. I think there's a lot of work that remains. So the anonymous credential primitive is just one piece of the whole digital ID infrastructure. And it may not be suitable in every use case. So a more careful taxonomy of use cases and a more careful threat modeling or identifying their requirements is would be very helpful. I think exploring other parts of the digital ID infrastructure is also really important. For example, we need public registries to host these canonical databases of issuers, verifiers, relying parties, and just public data, DID infrastructure. So the Ethereum blockchain is one venue for this that is credibly neutral. So this was a summary of our work at OpenAC. Lots of work remains to be done. Please reach out if you're interested in contributing. If you have any feedback, if you have any requirements that we haven't addressed, future directions you're interested in exploring, and especially in contributing to the standards effort. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ying Tong, for sharing that with us. Makes me feel very confident that you're working on all this and doing things that I cannot comprehend, but I appreciate that you can, and the people that you work with do. And it's nice for us all just to know that that's happening at the high level. So keep up the great work. We're going to move on here to our Project Glitch Fireside Chat. We have Wayne Chang, who is the CEO of Spruce ID. And so you guys are getting a little bit more than you bargained for, I think, today with regard to privacy and identity. So thank you for putting up with that and taking it all in. You're leaving here today as experts, so you can pick up your certification at the door.
Did you all see that low battery indicator happening? I was like, is it gonna finish? Nerves of steel that woman had. Wow.
Yeah, so we've talked a lot about digital identity today, but we're going to dive a little bit deeper into the weeds in this conversation. Yeah. Good morning, everyone. Happy PGP. My name's Mike Orcutt. I'm the founding editor of Project Glitch, small journalism startup. We publish a newsletter, projectglitch.xyz, and we curate live event content like this that's happening as I speak. Very thankful to have Wayne Chang with us this morning, founder and CEO of Spruce ID, and a passionate advocate for new digital identity technology and also policy mindsets. I would say a leader in the industry. If anyone else follows this guy on LinkedIn, you know what I'm talking about. We're going to talk about the near future of digital identity, picking up on some of the themes that we talked about last month, particularly with respect to the Genius Act and stablecoins. But to start, Wayne, can you tell us who you are, what Spruce is, what Spruce does exactly?
Yeah, sure. So my name's Wayne. I'm the founder and CEO of Spruce ID. Our mission is to let people control their data across the web. Instead of you signing into a platform that controls everything about you, we'd prefer the platform have to ask you for permission to access your stuff, and you get to have control over that. You can turn it off, add data sharing, but it's up to you, right? So that's what we're trying to do with Spruce ID. I've been pretty passionate about this idea of digital agency or giving people more control in the digital world, right? You get to take your physical assets with you and things of that nature. That didn't totally translate to the digital world so well, right? But I think there's still a lot of opportunity to get it right. And that's what we've been focusing on at Spruce ID. One of the things that I really think about, so the first startup that I worked on was a health tech startup. And every time I think about that song that's like Dumb Ways to Die just plays in my head because people die because they can't get a PDF from one provider to another provider. I'm like, that's one of the dumbest ways to die, right? So how can we solve data interoperability to give people more control over their stuff, right? And that also is for financial sectors. That is also other aspects of your life. And that led us to author something called Sign In with Ethereum. I was an author on that standard. It's how you log into a website with your Ethereum account. You don't have to pay a gas fee or anything, but you don't have to use a large login provider, right? Like there are big banks and there are big login providers. So if they decide that you shouldn't be able to access your account anymore, or for some reason you can't get into it, right? Think about how much access you lose. across your life, right? So how do you make sure that you have this autonomy in the digital world? Well, maybe you can use your blockchain account to do more than create financial transactions. Maybe you can use it to log into a website or something, right? So this line of thinking led us down to start building. And one of the realizations was that actually some of the most important data for you to control resides with government records, with the financial sector, with healthcare industries, right? So how can we make sure that these data are available to you in a way that you can control and have discretion over, right? So that has led to our work a lot with the public sector. We work with the California DMV. We build the digital identity program in that state. We build the digital wallet and the issuance infrastructure. We work with the state of Utah on digital credentials for use cases like off-highway vehicle permits or food handler cards for restaurant workers, which are all like under 35, so they really want it on their phones, right? So how do you modernize and create efficiency? How do you reduce fraud, right? And we're really excited to continue our work here and watch as the digital assets ecosystem presents a huge opportunity to modernize how everything works while also taking back privacy.
One of the things accelerating that is the Genius Act, arguably. And one of the things that the Genius Act did was call on the Treasury to solicit public comment on the use of innovative or novel methods, techniques, or strategies to detect and mitigate illicit finance risks involving digital assets. And Spruce ID, Wayne's company, submitted a super thorough comment, many pages. And in its request near the top wrote that we have an opportunity today to restructure the entire KYC AML process and be less burdensome, more privacy preserving, and more effective for enforcement operations. And that by combining digital credentials with and modern cryptography, the U.S. can reimagine how financial compliance is performed. So I want to unpack that a little bit, starting with the term digital credential. I know Spruce works with lots of different kinds of digital credentials, if I'm not mistaken, but I've been hearing about all kinds of credentials lately. Sometimes they're called verifiable credentials, anonymous credentials, like we heard on Ying Tong's talk. Sometimes they're called MDLs, or mobile driver's licenses. And I know there's this thing called an MDoc, or mobile document. So what do all of these things have in common, and what should we prioritize in terms of like how we think about them?
Great question. And I think this is a common source of confusion for people getting into digital identity or credentials. And I would say that if you remember the Betamax versus VHS debacle, right, it's not too dissimilar from that. The difference is that it's all digital. So there's lower cost for having multiple formats if you can automate away, right? You don't have to physically build another receptacle for a different format. It's another piece of software, right? So I think that these are all different ways to represent facts about reality, right? So that's, hey, Wayne can drive a car, or this person is a broker dealer and they're licensed by so-and-so, or this person can ride an ATV in the mountains of Utah. These are all claims, right? And claims is actually a very popular word by identity professionals. There are claims about individuals and things. It kind of goes back to what is identity, right? And especially in DC, I think that there's a ton of answers to that. But the answer I like to use, because I find it pretty useful, is identity is the way that we recognize, remember, and respond to people, places, things, agents, whatever, right? Things have identities. And I think that having these claims about different entities, right, represented as credentials. That's how I think about credentials. The term that I like is also the term that NIST uses, the National Institute for Science and Technology, verifiable digital credentials. Why do I like that term? Because no one named their technical standard after that. It's just kind of this free word that we can use to describe a general class of technologies that combine things like digital signatures, having machine and human readable representations of the claim, having certain features like selective disclosure of fields. And these are really the tools that policymakers need to actually describe requirements, right? Because we can't have an ecosystem of people shilling my JSON thing's better than your CBOR thing. That's not the level of discussion that we can waste time on. We need to discuss, hey, we need this thing not to track you. Okay, let's talk about what that means and what are the ways that someone can be tracked or not. And we may arrive on anon-creds or ZK as a solution for that. We may arrive to different things. So that allows for innovation to continue to flourish. while also ensuring that the principles that we want as a society for how we use identity and data can basically be captured in policy.
Spruce's comment calls out MDLs, in particular mobile driver's licenses, which notes that 17 U.S. states have adopted, and a dozen. These numbers may not be up to date, but that a dozen or so others are developing MDL programs. I've heard some people raise alarms about MDLs in the privacy context, but the comment as I was reading it, it struck me that it was making the case that this could be a starting point for the sort of restructuring of the KYC AML system that I talked about earlier. Am I understanding that correctly? And it's like MDLs plus other things, right?
Yep, I think it's like 22 right now. My morning routine is get my coffee, check how many MDL implementations there are in the United States, and figure it out. But there is some controversy regarding the MDL, and I think that the real source of this, I think, is when the deployments and the tech outpaces the discussion and the policy that's supposed to result, right? And this is where you get people like, hey, wait a minute, one day it's available on my phone. What? Like, who let the government do this, right? And if so, what's the new social contract for this? Because when I'm using my physical ID, right, I'm not expecting that it's being tracked everywhere I'm using it by a central entity, right? So if that is the social contract we were used to with physical IDs, right, what is the expectation for digital IDs? So I think it's actually very valid that people are extremely concerned that, wait a minute, everything gets easier when you make it digital. It gets easier to secure, but also easier to track, right? So how do we make sure that what the social contract should be is actually there, right? And laws is a really good answer to that. So basically taking a policy and civic discussion approach to this, I think, is critical to avoid a lot of the controversy. And I think that yesterday I pointed to basically Utah's Senate Bill 260, where, that was 2 days ago. Yeah, Monday, sorry. Oh, geez. Senate Bill 260 that talked about state-endorsed digital identity. And it describes a set of constitutionally based protections for any digital identity program in the state of Utah, right? And it says that it won't track you. And it talks about overcollection of data. It talks about how you must always provide a physical version of the ID available to people who want one. They're not forced to use the digital system, and you can't discriminate on the basis of if you're using physical or digital for access to government services, right? So these are really strong protections, but it took basically that community to come together and have discussions about, well, what do we want, right? And coming out with, okay, we think this is what would be acceptable to society. So I think when you miss a step like that and you just like, okay, now it's available on your phone, right? Or everyone has to get one or something like that, right? That's when you run into a lot of the issues and the controversy. One notable one is one called the server retrieval mode of the MDL, where there is a mode where there is a server that has the data and the user can authorize the data to be retrieved from the server retrieval, right? That can be very controversial because that's not how physical IDs work, even in rough analogy, right? And if people are surprised by that, then I can see why they're upset, and there is surveillance potential with that mode of operation. But it is just one mode, and it's not mandated to implement MDLs that way. Most MDL programs that I know, I think all of them in the US at this point, use device retrieval, which makes a digital signature and puts it to the device, right? And then from the device, you can selectively disclose the fields from the MDL. And I think this is how Apple and Google implement it, and you can check their documentation. And I think Android and Google has done a lot of open source work that you can verify. But the point is that there was this other valid way to implement it, right? So if someone says MDL and there's no, additional guidance or discretion, then maybe server retrieval is valid for that implementation, right? So just like how when you make policy decisions, you kind of imply some technical ones. Well, when you make technical decisions, you imply some policy decisions. So if there are no guidelines around it to begin with, then there's a lot possible, and I think people are right to be concerned.
I think the distinction that you drew between the device retrieval and the server retrieval, that's what you mean by combined with modern cryptography, the digital credential plus modern cryptography. But you teed up the policy question that I have pretty well. The subtitle of this panel uses the term policy innovation, which is a term that I heard you use on stage on Monday. That was 2 days ago, at the SEC's Roundtable on Privacy and Surveillance. But the Treasury, in its request for information, did explicitly ask for some recommendations. And the first thing that Spruce suggested in its comment is that Treasury should recognize verifiable digital credentials issued by many acceptable sources as valid evidence under the Consumer Identification Program, CIP, and Customer Due Diligence, CDD, obligations, including as documentary verification methods when appropriate. So can you decode that a little bit for us? What is CIP or CIP? What is CDD? And what is the significance of the term documentary?
Those are great questions. So, and I think a lot of the people in this room I'm just looking at are just, great experts at this. So very shy right now. But I think that at a high level, there are requirements that financial institutions have to meet, their obligation for basically making sure that we're not sending, hundreds of millions of dollars to finance illicit like nuclear programs and terrorism and a bunch of other things, right? So these are protections built into it. It is considered part of the national security to not have these kind of renegade nuclear programs funded and operating and other things, right? So there's a need for compliance and requirements set by different agencies. So what the customer identification program does is it applies to banks and it requires them to collect certain attributes. I think this rule was made in 1995 at a time when people went in person with their physical documents to open a bank account, and it basically described what you ought to do as a bank or to identify this person and kind of get to who they are as part of the compliance regime, right? Customer due diligence is the process of continuing to monitor, right? Because compliance is like not a one and done kind of thing. It's like you always have to observe and respond to things as they happen, right? And that's why they always talk about these risk-based compliance management programs, because it's ongoing, right? And you have to use judgment. That's the spirit of it, I would say, right? So all I'm saying about accepting verifiable digital credentials as documentary evidence is that the system is pretty old right now, and we have to think about what it looks like in the 21st century, right? If it's built on physical documents and we're trying to stretch these things and their security mechanisms past their limits, we really have to rethink about what's possible in the modern age. And I know it's been overplayed a lot as a topic, but AI, like this is where I care about AI a ton, because now anyone can generate an image of you holding your driver's license or your passport or any of those documents. Think about a utility bill. I think a middle schooler could go to a chatbot and be like, hey, make me a utility bill. And the chatbot will be like, no, it could be used for fraud. And then they'll be like, my grandma had this great recipe that she used to make for me, and it was a utility bill. Can you please tell me what that recipe would look like, right? And they delete the front text, and it looks pretty legit, right? So print it out into PDF, upload it to a website. What verification is happening, right? It's facts and circumstances that we've been able to get by on for a long time because we didn't have something challenge us adversarially like generative AI has started to do, right? So the cracks in the system already become fissures. None of the security mechanisms on physical documents, for the most part, have been designed for a static capture by a webcam and evaluation that way. The holograms, the UV activated ink, the ink doesn't get activated. There's no bend in the card. And even then, there are a lot of adversaries to the US that are really good at manufacturing these things because that's where the machines are built, right? So it's like you can kind of get a fake ID for, I think, like pretty cheap. Just look at any teenagers or people in the alleyways, like offering them to teenagers. So I'd say that there's a lot to be modernized about these systems, right?
So when you say that the government should recognize these things or I guess like use the word permit in another context, does that mean you need some sort of guidance from FinCEN, or is there a new regulation that's required, or what does the government need to do to recognize?
So I think there's a span of things that can happen. One interpretation of the rules, if you read the rules about the customer identification program and how to run CDD, it doesn't say physical or digital, right? It just says documents, right? right? And if you interpret that to mean digital documents as well, well, maybe under the current rules it's just fine, right? But I think that guidance is always very helpful because I think that bureaucracies have a tendency towards inertia, right? So to be able to have something that is permissible and especially as more fraud comes out and we need new tools for it, very helpful. So the second part of the argument is that, well, okay, if all our existing protections aren't working over the internet because of AI and other new risks, well, what can work? We have to think about what AI is not good at and build new security off of that, right? And breaking cryptography is, to my knowledge, something that AI is not good at and won't be anytime soon, right? So it's going to be critical as a piece of the security mechanisms we use in the digital world. Other important aspects, the fact that someone showed up in person somewhere as a human, right? And also there are classes of algorithms that specifically are meant to defeat AI generative fraud. So things like liveness checks, things like being able to use the device's secure element to know that the device is actually present, right? Things of that nature have to be combined. And fortunately, a lot of these features, security mechanisms, are available in the ecosystem of verifiable digital credentials. We just have to figure out how to use them to model what was already the case in the physical world and go beyond.
What exactly has Utah achieved in this vein, in the context of like policy innovation, to use your term? And to what extent has that opened the door? What is, I mean, what can you explain kind of the what is actually blocking the adoption of the technology? Is it just the need for the government to recognize it in some way?
I think that the technology will get adopted whether we like it or not in response to increasing fraud, consumer expectations of convenience, and a whole bunch of things, right? Why I think the work in Utah is so instrumental is that it creates a set of protections that govern that work that will progress, right? I think that we've seen credit cards go to our phones. We've seen a bunch of things. You do banking, healthcare on your phone, right? All this stuff comes to digital, right? I think identity will be no different. And we even seen some countries mandate digital identity to much protest. So in order for us to have these rights in the digital age, right, I think it's critical that you're able to have this framework. And I think one really innovative thing that Utah is doing is that they're building a whole coalition around this idea of state-endorsed digital identity. So it's not just a Utah thing. At the State-Endorsed Digital Identity Summit earlier this year, or the SETI Summit, there were, I think, basically legislators or tech executives that worked for 12 different states that showed up and were just very interested in this. And it wasn't a partisan thing either. I think a lot of people are just aligned with, hey, let's just give people more control over their identity and their data.
The reason I think that this is a privacy topic, even though we've been talking about identity, is that the trend, the technological trend, is towards reducing the amount of information that's collected every time you have to open a new account or do other kinds of things with financial institutions. But there's still, someone still has to verify, like it's either the state, like you said, or it could be something else. Still has to verify that someone is who they are, and I believe has to kind of keep that information somewhere, like someone, at least one entity, right? Spruce talks about this thing that it calls an identity trust in the comment. But can you just talk to the general idea and explain what an identity trust is in that larger context?
Yeah, so I think it's really helpful to think about some of the problems that exist first and why this thing might be useful, right? So how many servers have a picture of your passport or your driver's license? Do you know that number? I don't know that number. And that's a problem, right? So I think that especially as you start to have to open bank accounts and you start to deal with entities under record-keeping requirements under the Bank Secrecy Act, right? They're retaining images of stuff. They don't want it. They're like, ugh, like I hate having this picture of your passport. I wish I didn't have to, but the law says they have to keep it for like 5 years, right? So I think that, and we're building these silos that can get compromised and leak the data, and then people can generate your identity from it and ruin your credit. All these horrible things are possible when you have this sort of unfettered sharing of your data in different places. Does it get copied further? What about all the KYC services? How do they handle your data, right? Did you read all their policies? So I think that this creates huge exposure and frankly a lot of national security risk too, because now like people can have general information about Americans' PII if it gets leaked. And you see all the news articles about sites getting hacked. Someone uploaded a picture of their passport to prove they're over 18 to join a website. They said they'd delete it. Now there's like 100,000 of millions of them that get hacked and, entering the dark web. So that's one of the big problems, I think, that this is sort of an overcollection of data and it can be abused in many ways, right? So what I'm saying is, okay, if that problem is so bad, can we just do it once and actually like keep that pretty secure? And let's not make it the same entity for everyone. Like, let's give people choice, but like just pick one of these things and do it there. And they're specialized in keeping it secure, right? And just doing that piece, not necessarily the rest of your data, just that. Can they do that? And that's acceptable for this part of the process. And if they do that, can you get a credential in a wallet of your choice, which meets the security and privacy requirements? You can take that and go about the financial ecosystem to easily interact with things. And you're only using it if you're legally required to present ID, right? Otherwise, like, just don't use it if it's not necessary.
Two more questions for Wayne up here, and then we'll take some from the audience. One more thing that Spruce recommended is that Treasury should issue interpretive guidance or rulemaking confirming that zero-knowledge proofs, pseudonymous identifiers, and multi-party computation could be used for some of these processes that we were talking about earlier. Can you expand on that? What is missing from the government side when it comes to the adoption of zero-knowledge proofs and some of these kind of frontier privacy-preserving technologies?
In a word, understanding for the most part, because public servants have a ton of things to focus on, way more scope than they have time for, right? And they already spend a ton of hours. So someone needs to prioritize it for people to learn about, right? So that they're able to spend time and get that expertise. Because once, like, it's not like, one authority has all the power to do everything right away. But when FinCEN issues guidance, my understanding is that agencies have to interpret that guidance to their particular situations, and then they can specialize it, and then the industry also has a part of it. But having that guidance, which is like, hey, these things are important and can produce a better system, let's focus on it, right? I think that actually changes the conversation a lot. And fortunately, one of the benefits over the past year or so, there's been a lot more engagement from federal agencies in terms of, hey, how do we get this right? And I think that's awesome to see. But I think that getting the nod as well that, hey, you can focus on these things and we think it's important because it'll help us get privacy, it'll help us prevent a bunch of fraud and a whole bunch and modernize our financial system, frankly, right? That is, I think, really important. I think that guidance is great. I think that it's also possible to have a legislative approach to this too. I know that there are a lot of discussions in terms of digital securities, other types of assets, right? Are there areas that we can modernize this by having that in the law, right? Because I think that when you talk to some financial institutions, some of the concerns are, okay, guidance is nice and directives are cool, but what if there is a change, right, in terms of agencies or priorities, right? How do I know that this is worth investing in, right? And a law is a very good way to do that.
There's some urgency here, I think, coming from a few different directions. So I think the Treasury has to implement Genius, and there's a risk that some policies could get entrenched that maybe aren't so good for privacy. There's also the age verification laws that Ying Tong talked about, and just a general kind of trend towards governments digitizing credentials. But also the technology itself, and especially the blockchain space, is evolving very quickly. There was a news event, I think last week, that Alea, which is a privacy chain, is partnering with Circle to launch a private stablecoin. When we were prepping for this conversation, you mentioned that you just want policymakers to feel like there's like the clock is ticking on this, that the time is running out, particularly with respect to kind of keeping up with the technology trends and the privacy chains and making sure that bad things can still be caught in that context. Can you expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, if we want to usher in the era of digital assets, right, and we don't want all the digital assets to go to bad actors like on day one, then we have to invest in digital identity. But we also don't want to create a surveillance state or over-centralization of these models. So how do we be thoughtful about this, right? Digital identity is going to be here whether we like it or not. It's just who is able to control the data, who's able to make the decisions to share the data? How is it governed, right? Those are the things that we really have to figure out, or else, it'll keep on trucking and you might not like the outcome, right? So I think having that discussion up front and early is really important, and that's why I stress the urgency.
Thanks so much, Wayne. Any questions from the audience for Wayne?
Thank you. Wayne, you not only do a lot of work here with the states, but you also monitor what's happening in other countries. Can you share what's happening in the UK as well as the EU with the EIDAS implementation?
Yeah, great question. So around the world, right? So I talked about VHS versus Betamax. The good news is that I think there's going to be like 3 or 4 different kinds of VHS, Betamax kind of things, right? Globally. And I think that it will be clear enough to implement. The UK was notable because I think there was some controversy about, I think, a mandatory digital identity to prove ability to work, right? And I think that was controversial. Personally, I was surprised about, okay, who would govern this? What agency, is overseeing it? What are sort of the protections built in? And I think that had a lot of open questions as a result, right? And this is probably one example where the rulemaking kind of preceded the discussion that was potentially necessary, right? So in the EU, they've taken a lot more of, I think, a top-down approach to identity. I'd say that the US is more bottoms-up. And I think that the EU has some great researchers in privacy, cryptography, and policy. They were working on the architectural reference framework as part of the EU Digital Identity Wallet Initiative. Member states, I think, were mandated to have their digital wallets live by the end of 2026. Each member state must participate. I think it's a directive. And they've aligned some of the standards. So there's some great technical work about the analysis of zero knowledge, cryptography protocols, and the like coming out of the EU. There's alignment. But I think that also it's important to think about use cases and adoption. Right? I think that's probably the most important thing, because if it's not used, you can invest all you want in a system. And I think taking an iterative approach where you're able to get things going, use cases tested out, seeing that the privacy guarantees are holding up, that's going to be very important for iterative development with software. So I think that we're seeing the world kind of boot up with identity. We're trying to understand, how it ties into financial compliance, which is frankly one of the most important use cases to get right. I think that a really important nexus for this work is the NIST National Cybersecurity Center of Excellence, NCCOE for short. They're doing a lot of great work working with the financial industry on how do you apply this for CIP and KYC use cases for the financial sector. They're working on things like benefits. How do you prevent fraud in benefits while making sure that they reach their desired recipients very quickly, right? And I think that it's good coordinating work. If you're really interested in getting deeper into identity, they have a great set of standards at NIST called 863 A, B, and C. And it talks about exactly what I said earlier. How do you recognize, remember, and maybe not so much respond, but like definitely recognizing, remember. Who are you? How do I know that's you? Right? That's what 63A talks about, identity assurance, or IAL, identity assurance levels. Or it talks about, how do I know that you're the same person as last time? And that's the whole multi-factor authentication idea, right? Like, how do you have multiple ways that it's unlikely that some stranger just guessed your password, right? So those are a really great starting point for learning more, and a lot of the efforts are coordinated around this globally.
There's one more over here.
One more.
Thank you very much. There are services right now that are publicly available, such as ID.me. You may be familiar with it. On that context, I understand how your product differentiates a little bit on the technical side, but from the mass adoption side and from the objective side, where we all trying to minimize identity theft, better our services, is there an opportunity for Spruce ID to collaborate with companies like ID.me, which has, I believe, maybe a better foot on the ground, providing this type of minimizing this discrepancies in the system?
I think collaboration and user choice is the only way forward. Like, I think that you need to increase the amount of options that someone gets to pick to do the thing. And we have to make sure that those options meet the requirements, right? And if we do that, then the competitive market does its thing and we get better and better solutions for cheaper and faster, right? So I like that direction a ton. And also I'll mention another thing due to, you mentioned age verification, right? I think that it's also very critical that we have non-government entities that can issue usable identification. And I think that's important because if you're trying to access information and it's restricted, right, and then you have to go through the government to get that access, that to me sounds kind of like an anti-pattern for freedom of speech, right? So if there are ways that it could be non-government issued identity, whether it's functional or foundational, we just saw that Apple and Google are both issuing digital identities into the Apple Wallet and Google Wallet respectively. It's derived from the passport. It's a derived credential, right? So we're starting to see some of this take root, but I think it broaches a broader discussion about what does that mean? Why and how, right? Like, so what are the parameters around that? Right now it's usable at the airport. What about for banking? What about for healthcare? These use cases that matter a lot, right? So these are the conversations that we need to have over the next 12 months or so because it's moving fast.
You wrap it up right there?
Let's wrap it up. Hey, thank you all so much.
Thanks so much, Wayne.
You truly had a masterclass, and I'm not joking. I mean, you now know more than 99.9% of anybody in the world about digital identity and privacy. I want to say one thing real quick that you can look forward to in 2026. I've been vibe coding, let's just be honest, a new way to have you all register for these meetings, and I'm going to try to release that in the new year. That is all based on NFTs. You get an NFT membership, you can have a free one, or you can contribute if you want, but free is the default. And then for each meeting, you get an NFT. So we were joking about Proof of Paul, and so our friend here, I believe, who posted about proof of PGP? W3DC did. So there's going to be actually a proof of PGP for every meeting that you can collect that you come to. So when you RSVP, you get that. And I want to thank Wayne because a key part of this thing that I built, that AI built, is using sign-in with Ethereum. And I would love to take it to the next level, Wayne. So maybe I can bring your mind into that, and we can add Spruce ID at some point. But look for that in the new year. I'll be sending emails. Go ahead and continue using Luma for now, and you'll see when that all comes out. All right? It's good to see you all. Thank you. Have happy holidays. Take care.